friends, and welcome to the May 3rd edition of Weekly Witness, Texas Impact's weekly opportunity for mainstream Texans of faith to learn about public policy issues here in the great state of Texas and have a conversation about how you can engage in the process. My name is Scott Atnip, your host and Texas Impact's Engagement Director, and today's episode is brought to you by Methodist Healthcare Ministries of South Texas and Friendship West Baptist Church in Dallas. And I want to start out today with a couple of quick announcements. First, we are still encouraging signatures on our Texas Faith for Fair election statement at everyvotetx.org. You can go to that page and find out more information about voter suppression bills here in Texas and add your name to the list of Texans of faith who are making a clear statement rejecting voter suppression. Second, y'all, I know I did this last week too, but there are 4 weeks left in the legislative session if you are listening live. And as of right now, nothing has passed to completion and nothing is totally dead. And I know, friends, that there has been a lot of negative news over the course of the last few weeks. There have been disappointing votes. We've talked about a lot of these on these programs and in our communications. But we've also had some small victories, some good bills that we're supporting that have taken steps forward in the process, things like the police reform bills that passed the House last week. And so we're gonna have some negative news in this conversation. We are going to have some news that is disappointing to many of you, but I want to just encourage you at the top today to continue to do the work over the course of these last 4 weeks. I've been so encouraged by the work of the Weekly Witness community and the Texas Impact Rapid Response Team, but we have to finish strong over these last 4 weeks. And then I promise we'll give you a short break before we begin the work of addressing what happened during the legislative session as we move forward in the legislative calendar. So on to today, we are going to be focusing on one of those issues that we will be talking about a lot more post-session as we talk redistricting with Stephanie Swanson with the League of Women Voters. Then we'll welcome Reverend Danielle Ayers and our friends from Friendship West Baptist Church for a special Bringing It Home segment before closing it out with Joshua Houston and our legislative update and action alert. You will be able to find on our website the action alert later today. Go to texasimpact.org, click on the Action Center, and you'll be able to pull that up in the action alert section. But before all of that, I'm honored to welcome to the conversation a good friend and a good friend of the program, Rabbi Josh Fixler with Congregation Emmanuel in Houston, and also president of the Faith Leaders Coalition of Greater Houston. So Rabbi Fixler, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for all of the incredible work that you're doing. The floor is now yours for this week's Weekly Word.
Well, thank you, Scott. It's such a joy to be here and an honor to be a partner with Texas Impact in this work. So thank you for having me. According to the Jewish tradition, when God set out to create the world, God made 2 radical decisions. The first we called tzimtzum, or contraction. According to the Kabbalists, the Jewish mystics, before God created the universe, everything was God. And so it would have been impossible for something finite to exist in a space taken up by the infinite. So God contracted God's self in this act we called tzimtzum. God made an opening, which God could then fill with the universe. It is this idea which allows us to understand freedom of choice. Were it not for this act of God stepping back, there could be no free will, only divine providence. But because God makes space, we are granted the gift of freedom, the ability to choose. God does not preordain our mistakes or our triumphs. Rather, God watches us, prays for us, celebrates with us when we make good choices, but all the while, we are the ones with the freedom to choose. God declares in Deuteronomy, I set before you this day life and goodness, death and evil. Choose life that you and your children may live. God wants us to choose well, to choose wisely, to choose lovingly. And God knows that ultimately it is up to us, for with tzimtzum, God has given us that precious gift of freedom. And God made a second radical decision at the time of creation. When the moment came to make human beings, God decided that all people would be descended from a single family, from Adam and Eve. In the Talmud, in the books of Jewish law, it says that Adam was created alone for the sake of peace among people, so that no one might say to their fellow, my father was greater than yours. The first chapters of Genesis remind us that we are all one human family, people of all genders, of all races, of all orientations and beliefs. We are all equal. These are the messages of the creation story: freedom and equality. And democracy lies at the intersection of these two values, the belief that all people are equal in their power to choose. The idea that each person can and should have a voice in matters that affect them and their community is a celebration of these God-given gifts. This is an idea that humanity has never fully realized. The founding vision of our nation, that all people are created equal, is one that we are still trying and striving to make a lived reality. The ongoing expansion of voting rights speaks to our ideals. The corresponding trend to contract voting rights speak to humanity's power to choose evil instead of good. So we work and we fight for a day when that vision of Genesis will be achieved, that almost messianic ideal of democracy where all people have an equal voice and an equal vote. We see in attempts to curtail voting rights a denial of that vision. To privilege some voices over others is to deny the inherent equality in every person. Bills like SB 7 and HB 6 undermine God-given equality in our state by making it too difficult or too terrifying for some people to vote. As Texans of faith, we must stand against this, not just on political grounds, but on theological grounds. And as we prepare our state for the difficult task of redistricting, we should keep in mind these sacred messages as well. Will we use this decennial responsibility of redistricting as an opportunity to expand democracy, to give more people a voice, or will we use it to silence the voices of some and privilege the voices of others? Will we work towards a system that God would look on proudly as an example of freedom and equality, or one that God would abhor as a brazen attempt to gerrymander away choice for some? We stand at the precipice of a rare opportunity, the chance to build a world that more closely resembles that vision of Genesis, of a world infused with freedom and equality. We Texans of faith must stand together and declare loudly our commitment to these ideals. Each choice sets before us life and blessing, curse and evil, and we must choose to work for blessing for our state and its residents. So friends, let us prepare for this work with these words of blessing. May we find hope in the intersecting vision of our various faith traditions as we work to build a brighter tomorrow. May the ancient Holy One who gives us and teaches us that we are always having a choice give us the strength to stand up for freedom. May the Eternal One who teaches us that we are all equal give us the courage to stand up for equality. And may the Infinite One look with pride at the choices we make in the weeks and months to come. And let us say, Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Josh. I know this has been one of my favorite segments throughout the course of session because I feel like I get to start my Monday with a solid theological foundation from some of my favorite people. And you certainly have laid the groundwork both for Stephanie's conversation on redistricting, but also Josh's conversation on voting later in the program. So thank you so much, Josh. Next, we would like to welcome to the conversation Stephanie Swanson, who is the issue chair of redistricting for the League of Women Voters and one of the leaders in the Fair Maps Texas Coalition. Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So this is something that we're going to be talking about today, but also in the months to come. So I'm looking forward to the conversation multiple times over the course of the next year. But let's start with the fact or the idea that the census numbers finally came out last week after a long delay, and Texas is adding 2 congressional seats, which is kind of the headline number. But could you update us on where we are in the redistricting process and what we expect moving forward?
I will. So I will explain what apportionment was and what we saw last week. And then I'm going to segue into a brief explanation of redistricting, because a lot of people don't quite understand what's going on, how it works, and what's at play, basically. And so last week, what we saw was the apportionment numbers that were released. And all this means is that all the total populations for each state from the census that was released. And so back in the 1960s, the Supreme Court said that all of our election districts need to be exactly the same size, basically. And so every 10 years, that's what you see. You have the census where we count every single person in the US, so we know where people have moved over the past decade. But then we need to reallocate our congressional seats to states based on if they've gained or lost population. And so this past decade, Texas gained a lot. In fact, we gained more population than any other state in the nation. Unfortunately, however, because of how the census played out, because of the past presidential administration's decisions to intimidate and try to exclude the immigrant population here and across the US, because of other things that were happening like the pandemic, we did see an undercount here in the state, and that did end up costing us this seat. And so while we did gain 2 seats, that number really should have been 3 seats according to state demographers. But that's okay. A lot of states around the nation also saw the same effect. Florida, for example, Arizona, those states as well didn't gain as many congressional seats as experts were anticipating. Okay, so after apportionment comes in, what's going to come out in the fall is the redistricting data. And so the redistricting data is what the state needs in order to redraw our election maps. It gives you the block by block info of how many people live in each block, basically. And then what they're going to do is they're going to go back and draw all of our election districts over from congressional all the way down to your local water board and school boards. And so the state legislature themselves, they are the ones that are going to be drawing the maps for the congressional, state house, state senate, and state board of education. And yes, they are in charge of drawing their own election maps. And this makes the whole process prone to something called gerrymandering. Gerrymandering is the process of drawing district lines to favor one party or group of people over another. And it has been used heavily here in Texas for the past 50 years. Because of this, we've had a really huge problem, not only with extreme partisan gerrymandering, but also with racial gerrymandering. Something to keep in mind now as we move into this next redistricting cycle, it's called a post-Shelby world. So in 2013, there was a famous Supreme Court decision that gutted the Voting Rights Act. It was Shelby County versus Holder. That gutted preclearance. Preclearance meant that states had to get any changes in their election law approved by a federal authority before they took effect. And this is specifically states that had a history of racial discrimination. Texas, like I said, has violated the Voting Rights Act and specifically discriminated against voters of color in their redistricting maps every single decade for the past 50 years. And so here we are moving into this next redistricting cycle without that protection. And so it's going to be a very completely different environment. So before the call, Scott was asking, oh, are you going to have a fun time over the summer and take a break after the legislative session? I'm like, no, we're just gearing up because we now need to lay the groundwork moving into this next cycle of redistricting, because what we already know is we are going to be expecting litigation moving forward. And so we need to lay the groundwork. We need to be more proactive because we know what's coming. We don't have preclearance, so we have to ramp up our game ahead of time, basically.
So this is certainly a different experience because usually this redistricting piece would be a part of the legislative session. And it's different this time, right? Because we know there's going to be a special session. So I've been telling our folks, we'll take a very short break post-session, but then there's going to be more work to do. So can you talk to us about why it's important that Texans of faith pay attention to these redistricting conversations and engage in the process?
I think it's going to be important for every Texan. For people of faith, though, it's going to be even more important. So as you follow along with this weekly podcast, Texas Impact warmed you up and introduced you to many different issues during the legislative session that unfolded, right? We didn't see much improvements across the board, to be honest. We fought hard, but honestly, we did not see many improvements. We didn't see an expansion of access to healthcare. We didn't really see a swift response to the fallout from the winter storm. We haven't seen too many improvements in problems with systemic racism. A lot of different issues that all of us care about that are impacting us on a daily basis. We did not see improvement in that. And so that is why we need to be very present in the redistricting process so we can ensure that maps that are drawn for us we want them to reflect our community. And the way that we do that is we watch when the maps are drawn and we give as much input as possible. And by doing that, we create a record for future litigation. So if, in fact, the legislator does discriminate against voters of color, we now have a good basis going forward to file litigation, basically.
So what's the messaging that you would recommend around this process? How should we begin talking to our congregations and legislators and others right now?
We have two different groups of messaging that I'm going to talk about, and it's important that you kind of discern between the two. One, when you speak with legislators, you want to talk about creating a fair and open process. And so this is very specific messaging that was taken from a federal court here in Texas. So back in 2018, this federal court considered putting the state back under preclearance because they did such a horrible job of drawing the maps in 2011. The maps that they drew didn't pass preclearance, and there were so many findings of intentional discrimination in the maps that federal court reviewed putting the state back under preclearance. They ultimately denied extension because of a previous Supreme Court case in 2017, 2018. Besides that, though, that judge did issue the state a very stern warning, and they said, you need to have a fair and open process this next time around. You need to have maps visible to the public to review. You need to have public input hearings across the state. And you need to try to include the public in the process, basically. So the Fair Maps Texas Coalition has used that judge's warning as leverage over the legislator. Because of that, we have seen an expansion in the number of public input hearings around the state. Not only that, but people were allowed to provide testimony virtually, which was one of the only times the legislator approved that for this session. And that wasn't because of us, that was because of the judge's warning. He said, you need to take this seriously this next round of redistricting. So that's what the Fair Maps Texas Coalition is going to continue to do. And so we are going to work over the next 6 months to kind of rally our community. We're going to get together in large coalitions and work on drawing maps with the communities and try to submit that to the legislator for their consideration. That also goes to that future litigation that I've been talking about. So we kind of set the grounds. Going back though, messaging. So fair and open campaign. You want to use messaging from the Fair and Open campaign. If you go to the Fair Maps Texas website, we have very specific messaging that you can follow and use. We've had a fair and open campaign around that messaging, and it's worked out very great. Not only does it tell you the problems that we saw in 2011, but it gives very clear messaging on what we expect from the legislator for improvements for this next round, basically. When you go and speak with the community, this is completely different now. You can talk about fair and open because those folks are going to be obviously talking to the legislators, hopefully at some point. But in order to get them motivated about redistricting, you need to talk about all of the other issues that are of concern to your community. So all of the issues that Texas Impact has followed over the legislative session, we really need to start tying those issues to redistricting. As of right now, conservative lawmakers do have an outweighed say at the state legislature, and that has resulted in a legislator that does not reflect our community. When you look at Texas as a whole right now, 62% of Texans are people of color, but only 36% of our state legislators are people of color. And that discrepancy that we see is because of partisan and racial gerrymandering. And this is a struggle that we've seen since the time of Reconstruction. And since the passage of the Voting Rights Act. We want to keep pushing and pushing. It's going to be a long struggle, yes, I know, but it's very important for us to be here, be present in this work, and be active in it because it is a long-term struggle. And so, like I said, tying together all of the other issues that we care about, lack of access to healthcare, COVID relief, systemic racism, other issues like that, we want to be able to tie that not only to redistricting, but also to voting rights and reducing obstacles to the ballot.
So post-session, will there be another round of hearings, or is this going to be mostly meetings and conversations with our legislators?
So as this is one of the problems that Texas has. So because of our crazy legislative session, it was so short. What the legislator always claims is we don't have enough time to hold public input hearings. This was before the census data was delayed, but this is what they assumed was going to happen. So they don't have enough time to hold public input hearings during the legislative session. So what they do is they usually hold them during the interim. So the House Redistricting Committee started holding these hearings all the way back in 2019. Federal District Court already said that's silly to do that because you don't have that census data, so you don't really know where the population changes are. So again, it's going to be up to us to convince them to hold hearings as we get closer to the release of that census data, so we get more input. And so that's what the Fair Maps Texas will be doing as we get closer to that, the time of the census data when it's released. That being said, we can go ahead and start working with our community members right now to draw maps on communities of interest. And what those maps need to reflect is literally where our communities are located, what defines our community, what issues our communities are working on together to overcome. But that's all nonpartisan criteria. You make a little map, and that's what we're going to be submitting to the legislator, as we get closer to that census data being released.
All right, Stephanie, we'll really appreciate the time today. I'll give you a chance before we let you go. You've mentioned the Fair Maps. Is there a website, or where can we find more information if we want to learn more in the weeks and months to come?
So the Fair Maps Texas Coalition does have a website. It's fairmapstexas.org, all spelled out. We have our Fair and Open campaign up there. We'll be posting updates as well. The League of Women Voters, though, because that's you guys invited the League to talk. We do have one specific call to action. We had a big call to action last week. It's around the Redistricting Transparency Act, and I'll share that in the chat box and on social media as well. But anyways, this call to action is specifically for a piece of legislation. This legislation would create that fair and open process like the Federal District Court asked for. And so we're just looking for support for that one. And it's a letter campaign. So all you have to do is, if you agree with the letter, just fill out your contact info and it sends it to your elected officials for you.
Right. Well, Stephanie, really appreciate the time today, and thanks for your work on behalf of this issue. Friends, will certainly be talking about this more in the summer and as we move toward the inevitable special session. So stay tuned for more on redistricting. Stephanie, thanks again.
Thank you.
Right. So today we continue our special weekly witness segment, Bringing It Home, with Reverend Danielle Ayers, who is Minister of Justice with Friendship West Baptist Church in Dallas and a Texas Impact board member. This segment's designed to help you and your congregation figure out how you can bring home our weekly witness conversations. We plan on bringing you this segment about once a month. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Reverend Ayers and her guest for today, Diane Gibson. Danielle, take it away.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much, Scott. As always, we appreciate the opportunity. Friendship West and Dr. Haynes and I certainly appreciate this opportunity in bringing it home segment. As you know, at our church and congregation, we certainly believe that our faith and public life ought to intersect. And Dr. Haynes is adamant about that. He preaches and teaches that every single day and on Sunday mornings. And so I thought it would be so befitting today to have someone who I think certainly demonstrates what it means to live your faith in public life, and one who is out in the community, who works with the people. I always say she can walk with kings and queens and not lose her common touch with people. And she's demonstrated that over the years. When I moved here over 21 years ago, she was already doing the work. And so I thought, who else would be a perfect person to come and have a conversation around not just redistricting, but what does that mean for congregations and what congregations can do? And to Stephanie's point that she brought up earlier, and talking about the importance of what we can do to talk to our congregations, I think Ms. Diane Gibson is the perfect person to talk about it because she has been involved in it. And she is also a member of another amazing church here in Dallas, Texas, Concord, who is pastored by Brian Carter, a wonderful, amazing pastor right here in our city. So I think she is just an example of what it really means, what we say, to model Jesus and justice and to live out your faith in public life. So I just wanted her to share a little bit about her experience with dealing with redistricting and what we need to be doing to prepare ourselves to be educated in our communities and what we might do to be a part of that process. And particularly for Black communities and minority communities, how important that is, because we need to make sure we're having that conversation among ourselves and what we can do to be very much involved in that. So I want everyone to welcome, and look, she's so much involved in community. We love her so much. She's also affectionately known around the Metroplex as Miss Community, Diane Gibson. So thank you so much, Diane, for joining us today. So I'm going to leave the rest of our time to you about the next 6 minutes or so. If you can just tell us about what you've experienced firsthand and the importance of Black communities and Brown communities and other minority communities being deeply engaged and educated on this issue.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so sorry. Thank you, Danielle, for that wonderful introduction. And on behalf of Pastor Brian Carter and the Concord Church, I bring you all greetings in the name of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Thank you so much again. I am so excited. This is, without aging myself, this is my third time participating in redistricting. And you guys, I have to give credit where credit is due. The first person that actually educated me on redistricting was former City Councilwoman Sandra Crenshaw. 30 years ago was my first introduction to redistricting. I also got an opportunity to speak before the House in Austin, but that's who I learned the most from, was from her. But you guys, here's how we can get involved. And when I look at this last past election on Saturday, we got our work cut out for us. We really do, because I don't think we understand the urgency of why it's so important for us to participate in this process. And we want to continue to talk about equal representation. Well, you can't have equal representation if you don't get out and participate. Even the word of God himself says, faith without works is dead. So it's not enough just for us to have faith. You got to have some feet with those faith, and you got to get out and start doing something. Our former pastor, Dr. E.K. Bailey, used to tell us, you know, you got to put some feet with your faith, and you have to put some feet with your prayers. So what am I saying? Our job has to be that we have to go into the congregation, let them understand the urgency of why you need representation that look like you, because you want to understand the need in your community. Well, if you don't participate in the process, then somebody else is going to make that decision for you as to what you need in your community. And that's not what we're trying to do. We need to understand what are the needs in our community, and then we need to be vocal about that. I appreciate what the previous speaker said, well, we need to start writing letters to our elected officials. I think in our mind, we have learned to be so reactive until we forget that you get more accomplished if you are proactive. And this is the time now, well, really the time was participating in the census and understanding the urgency and why it was so important for us to complete the census. Then the second part is, now we need to make sure, and I think if I'm not mistaken, this is the last week that the legislature is supposed to be in session. And from what I heard from talking with some of them this week, is that they're supposed to be in session almost 24/7 this week. They're technically on lockdown as to what they're doing in this area on redistricting. And this is an urgency. And I did get the letter from the League of Women Voters. And it's just a simple template that we can just fill in. You don't have to write it all over again. You actually fill in the blanks. Fill in the blanks. You can email it, you can fax it, you can mail it, or you can simply make a telephone call. And I just reposted those numbers again this morning as to what we need to do to make sure our voice is heard. Because you know what? A closed mouth don't get fed. We have to do something, people. And it's my job in working with you, Danielle, and other members in other church. We have to understand and make congregations understand, because here's the thing. They always say, well, why do we come to the congregation? Why do we come to the churches? Because that's the one time we get your undivided attention. That's the one time we're all together, and for just for a minute, you're really listening to us. So it's not that we're trying to take the time to take away from anything from what thus says the Lord, but you also know that we have to also educate our people where they are. And so we have to take advantage and capitalize on that. If you would just read your mail or listen to the robocalls, we wouldn't have to do this, but you're not going to do that. And so we have to take advantage of that opportunity during the time when you're in services, and then educate you on what we need to do, how we need to do it, and get in a hurry to do it. And a lot of times we as a people really listen to our pastors. We really do. And so that's why we need them to educate us. That's why you have the Dr. Frederick Douglass Hayes III. That's why you have the Brian Carters. That's why you have the Dr. Tony Evans. That, not saying that they don't believe in God. Yes, they do. But they also want us to know how important it is for us to be a community that's involved on what's going on in our community and taking responsibility for what's happening in our community. Those are things that we have to do. And I'll just give this as a prime example. Had we just not done anything, Thanks to Dr. Haynes and all the other pastors of the African American Coalition that led the march, the charge on the payday lending loans, they would have still been here. You know, we were being saturated by those. And the people that was being affected was us. It was us. And so you guys, it works. It works. I walked with Dr. Haynes when we walked for 14-1. It works. It works. And so we have to do something. We just have to. And so I'm going to do my part. And Danielle, I know you're going to do your part. But we're going to educate our congregation on the redistricting. And we're not going to wait until the vote is cast. We're starting now to make sure they understand the importance of equal representation. They need to understand the importance of what is gerrymandering. They need to understand the importance as why do I need to get involved and why now? Why now? We need to make sure those 3 points are loud and clear and make sure we take an active role in participating and making sure we get equal representation. We can't afford to lose anything. So we can only gain, but we can't afford to lose anything. And that's I think that's my 6 minutes.
Thank you so much, Ms. Gibson. And can you just, for some clergy who may be listening, perhaps a pastor that may be listening, he's saying, oh, I would like to get my congregation educated and involved. Could you point them to maybe a resource or a place for them to start if they want to have someone come in and to educate their congregations? Because maybe pastors just don't know where to go to get this information, to get their congregations informed. What would you suggest a pastor do?
I would suggest that you can always call me. You can always call me. You can always call Danielle. So, and keep in mind now, there's only 2 of us and a whole lot of you all. But one of the things that I think it was Stephanie that said earlier, that you can also go on the webpage to the League of Women Voters. She has everything. All the bills are on there, not just the bills about redistricting, about the voter suppression bills. All of everything is outlined. I just looked at it this morning. And when you talk about very informative, in addition to having that information, she also has all your state representatives, state reps, and state senators, their name and telephone numbers are on the list. And like I said earlier, she has a template of a letter that you can actually fill out. So I would even direct you to the League of Women Voters page, and they have all of that information on there. Now, one of my state reps, who's my state rep, also sends you out a newsletter that has all that information on it, and that is State Representative Yvonne Davis. But I'm also sure that all your state representatives, because I know State Representative Jasmine Crockett is new, but she actually has a new bill on the floor. So we need to actually get in contact with her. But I would also recommend, again, you can still call myself or Danielle, but here's the other thing. Call your state representative, call your state senator. They have all the information. And if all else fails, again, go to the League of Women Voters website, and it's all nonpartisan, and they will give you all the detailed information all in one place, print it out, and give it to your congregation.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining me today on our Bring It Home segment. Thank you, Scott, once again, for allowing Friendship West, Dr. Haynes, and I to be a part of this weekly witness this session. I think this is our 4th weekly witness. And so what I hope I'm demonstrating through all the folks that I bring on is also showing clergy that you don't have to know it all, right? You can look inside your congregation. Someone may be an expert in that area, or, you look outside and partner. Collaborations are critical. I say this for all churches, and it doesn't matter if you're a mega church or you're a small congregation. Everything is about partnerships and collaboration. So I'm hoping I also just demonstrated that throughout this time that we come on in this segment, is that I'm not the only one talking about it, right? I bring in someone who knows what they're doing. They have lived experiences, and they are a very good demonstration of faith in public life, which is very important just for my theological grounding and certainly what I have learned and been taught over 20 years from Dr. Haynes. So thank you so much again for this opportunity for Friendship West to come in and share in this segment for this legislative session. It has been a joy.
Danielle, we certainly appreciate your leadership and the leadership of Dr. Haynes and Friendship West. And one of the things I've liked so much about this segment is you've given us a homework assignment. And I think the homework assignment for today is for everybody in Texas to call Danielle. Her cell phone, I'm just kidding. I think the homework assignment for today is start to have conversations with your congregation and your faith leader about what you're going to do to engage on redistricting. And the league has resources. We'll provide some more this summer, but start thinking about the steps that you and your congregation are going to take and start having those conversations today. Is that fair, Danielle?
That's
fair.
All right. All right, friends. Diane, Danielle, thank you both so much for joining us today and for the work you're doing each and every day. All right, next up, we will welcome to the conversation our very own Joshua Houston. And I just have to say, before we jump into this legislative update today, Josh, I have spent more time this session looking at the back of your head than I could ever imagine. For those who don't know, I'll sit and watch a lot of the hearings, and Josh usually plants himself in between the camera and the podium for the elections committee that we've been watching so much. And so, Josh, I feel like I really like seeing your face on this program, since I spent so much time looking at the back of your head.
Yeah, I don't know what to say about that. I'll be avoiding that camera from here on out. You can't see my cell phone, right? That's my big paranoia, is that in perpetuity will be whatever I'm texting to somebody.
It is nice to watch you text and then receive one. I know that we have that moment. Anyway, legislative update for this.
I don't respond. Yeah, that's another problem.
Legislative update. While I was watching the back of your head, a lot went on during the course of last week. Why don't you catch us up to speed on where we are?
Yeah, it was a busy week. So we have 28 days that remain for the 87th. The summary of last week is that lawmakers are continuing to write the narrative of the 87th legislature, and it continues to be about demonizing children that identify as LGBTQ. It continues to be about restricting the right to vote and not about fixing the electric market that left us all in the dark and in the cold. We have deadlines that we need to pay attention to coming up. Our first deadlines are upon us, which, it is what it is. The deadline for House bills to find a spot on the calendar is 8 days away. That's Tuesday, May the 11th. We have another 10 days in which the House can act on a House bill. And then after that, each chamber is working on the other chamber's legislation for the most part. The House Calendars Committee, therefore, remains the most important committee for probably from here on out, but at least it'll be heavily our focus for the next week, for at least another week. And so let's talk a little bit about what happened. Police reform is progressing with some mixed results. Started positive. There are a handful of several good bills that have passed out of the House, the originating chamber. While the big omnibus House Bill 88, entitled the George Floyd Act, has been stuck in committee, at least as a big whole, several smaller provisions were created, anticipating that this might be a likely outcome. And some of those smaller provisions, not all, but a number of those smaller provisions have advanced forward. You have House Bill 829, House Bill 830, House Bill 831, and House Bill 834, all by Representative Symphonia Thompson. House Bill 829 would create a disciplinary matrix for law enforcement in the state. House Bill 830 would prohibit Class C misdemeanor arrests, at least in traffic offenses, which are the vast majority of Class C misdemeanor arrests. And you have House Bill 834, which would require corroboration of eyewitness testimony for drug offenses, which has been a long-standing desire for reformers ever since Tulia, Texas. You had a corrupt officer frankly, dozens of people up there, and it happened again in the town called in Hearn, Texas, and that was about 15 years ago, and we've been fighting for this bill ever since. All three passed the House and are on their way to the Senate. Some good news out of the Senate. Senate Bill 69 would prohibit the use of neck restraints. It has passed the Senate, and it was making its way over to the House. So those are some good bills that are making progress that are along the way. However, the news is not all good on criminal justice. You have several bills that would penalize cities for reductions in police budgets. And you have bills that would increase penalties for offenses, for crimes that occur at a protest. A crime is a crime no matter where it occurs. They want to enhance the penalties if it happens at a protest, and those bills are making their way through the process too. So we may be hearing more about those in the next couple of weeks, just kind of a heads up on that. Let's move to the next big topic of our electric market. There are a few incremental bills making their way through the process. There's no bill so far However, that would institute vast restructuring of the electric market, or that would add any capacity to the grid, at least that have made significant progress so far. There's still time. I don't want to say it's dead yet, especially with the kind of lobby firepower that would be on these bills. But we're not seeing the big ideas to fix the grid. You're seeing things like, we'll warn you before it happens next time, without a whole lot of reform on making it not happen next time. The bills that are making their way, scapegoat, renewable energy, that is continuing. Over in the House State Affairs Committee, there are two bills that we'll talk about in the action alert that need to stay in the House State Affairs Committee. In fact, we'll talk a little bit more about where we're at in the action alert. So the good news is not much happened on the electric market front last week. On the healthcare front, the news begins to get worse. The bill to expand Medicaid, which had a majority of the Texas House signed on as co-authors of the bill. So 76, we had enough to pass the bill. That bill is effectively dead in committee. The chair did not set it for a public hearing. This would have been super late, but still possible if we had had a hearing this week, but there's no hearing. The issue of Medicaid largely appears to be dead. Frankly, there's not much time to move that bill as a standalone bill. There are two smaller bills, House Bill 133 and House Bill 290, that have passed the House. They have stalled in the Senate and need your help. So House Bill 133 would extend healthcare coverage after a pregnancy for 12 months. It has not been set for a hearing and sits in the Senate Health and Human Service Committee. Another bill, Senate Bill 290, would provide 12 months of continuous eligibility for children, 12 months as opposed to the current practice of every 6 months, which is just a gimmick to try to kick kids off the rolls when parents mess up, especially if they have more than one kid. This bill has not been referred to a committee. The lieutenant governor has not referred this bill to a committee so that it could even be heard. We need the lieutenant governor to move this bill, and therefore the target for calls is lieutenant governor. We'll talk about this in the action alert a little bit too. Let's talk about where we're at with LGBTQ equality, or in this case, inequality. So Senate Bill 1646 by Senator Charles Perry is truly one of the most draconian bills that we've seen, at least I've seen in 15 years of doing this work. It would criminalize parents that are supportive of their children who have come out to them, and would criminalize their seeking of medical care related to transgender health issues. It would also authorize the state to remove those children and put them in the state's foster care system. That same foster care system that a federal judge has declared unconstitutional for putting kids at unreasonable risk of harm, and where the federal judge found, quote, rape, abuse, and psychotropic medication are the norm, end quote. Over in the House side, so that bill passed the Senate. That bill came up on the Senate floor. 18 senators on a party line vote voted for it, and it is on its way to the House. So over in the House, we have another bill, House Bill 1399 by Representative Matt Krause. It would only prohibit doctors from providing medical care. It at least removes that criminal penalty element from the bill. Nevertheless, it would cut off medical care and get in between a patient and the patient's doctor, and also get in between the relationship between parents and children. It sits in the House Calendars Committee and will be one of the things we will have you call on in the action alert. And then last, but far from least, we were really kind of saving the biggest news for last. The chair of the House Elections Committee surprised his own committee by passing out a committee substitute, and I mean literally passing it out 20 minutes before they voted. And then they held a vote on Senate Bill 7 without a public hearing. Members of the committee strongly objected to this, and their objections were ignored. It was handled in such a manner, frankly, it was ham-fisted, procedurally speaking. It was handled in such a manner that it caused the swing vote on the committee to say pass. And that was the fifth vote needed to pass it. That was in the morning, about 9:45. That then caused the committee to withdraw the bill, go to the floor. And when they came back later that evening, the bill did eventually pass out on a party line vote. And it was really weird. Well, you couldn't see this on camera, but if you were in the room, there were a dozen lawmakers hanging out in the back that were not on the committee, and they came to watch it. It was a very weird thing that I've not, many things about this I have never seen before. And that was another one of those very weird things I had never seen before. Long story short, Senate Bill 7 is on its way to calendars. Probably today, the report will get issued. We'll see. We're watching it like a hawk. The committee report for House Bill 6 was finally released, and it is sitting in the calendars committee. Senate Bill 7 is now identical to House Bill 6. The substitute took out all the language from Senate Bill 7 and put in the language from House Bill 6. They are the same. Procedurally, this is critical, though, because if a bill does not pass in the exact same form in the other chamber, you have to have a conference committee to work out those differences. And if we do indeed move Senate Bill 7 and it passes the House, then you're in conference committee, and all those provisions of Senate Bill 7 that were in the Senate version become possible to come back in the bill in conference committee. So the long story short is House Bill 6 is Senate Bill 7, period. All the bad provisions of 7 are still very much alive, even though they were removed temporarily to get the bill moving through the process. Additionally, there are 78 bills that are still alive and potential vehicles for amendments that have to do with voting rights. 78 bills just on voting rights that are either bad or could go bad if they were amended, that we're having to watch. And they touch and affect every part of the voting process, from the point of registration to the very end and how they report election results and everything in between. So that's the news from last week. Scott, you want to tee me up with the action alert, I guess, or I kind of touched on some of it already.
Yeah, I'll tee you up. How about that? So you ended the legislative update with where you started the action alert, which is calling the calendars committee. And again, things are going to move very quickly over the course of the next 4 weeks, but especially the next probably 10 to 12 days. So if you're listening on Monday, this is your call to action, but that might change by Tuesday, right? And so we hope that you're on the Texas Impact Rapid Response team, and we'll try to get those updates out soon. But as of Monday, the two of the biggest, baddest voting bills, Senate Bill 7 and House Bill 6, are still in the House Calendars Committee. And so the first ask on the action alert is to call calendars, right?
That's right. And Scott's absolutely right. So last week we did a supplemental action alert. We did 2. And that's because we have about 48 hours notice at this point in session, where the House Calendars Committee has to post a calendar. Actually, it's only 36 hours in advance, but really it works out to about 2 days of notice before something moves, and things can move extremely quickly. So we do anticipate an additional action alert. So if you're listening to this on a Wednesday or a Thursday, the news has probably changed. So stay tuned and take a look for the supplemental alert that is likely to come. But yeah, right now, all eyes are on calendars, really trying to get them to hold up House Bill 6 and Senate Bill 7. That's the first thing. That is the biggest, baddest thing out there. In addition, we want them to oppose restrictions to voting by mail. And there are a number of these bills. We picked the ones that were most egregious that we testified against for the most part, maybe with one exception in here. But you have House Bill 1725, which would prohibit the hand delivery of a mail-in ballot. So many of you took your ballot by mail by hand because you were either concerned about the Postal Service or you got your ballot too late. It was within a week and it made you nervous and you wanted to make sure your vote counted. Well, this bill would prohibit you from doing that. You have House Bill 2320, which would make it a felony. If you pre-filled the excuse box on an application to vote by mail and distributed it to somebody. You may think, well, wait, that doesn't sound what? Okay, here's a real world example. We had congregations, 25 of them they were called vote by mail captains, and they distributed applications to vote by mail to everybody in all their parishioners in Sunday school classes where somebody was 65 plus. And the county, usually it depends on the county, but Travis County wasn't going to give, 50 to 100 of these things out. They'd give you one or two. And it'd be a really simple mistake for somebody to say, oh, I'm giving it to everybody 65 plus. Let me check that box before I make 200 copies, just to make it easier for my Sunday school class folks. And if they did that, if this bill passes and they did that, they would be a felon for that simple mistake. House Bill 2321 would require signature verification committees to look at data that is potentially decades old. So think about, in my case, my 98-year-old grandfather. I have 2 decades worth of birthday cards where I can show you the evolution of his signature. And I guarantee his signature today looks very different than it would have on his driver's license that's 25 years old. And if they're looking at those two things, they're going to say that doesn't match, and he's likely to be disenfranchised. House Bill 3080 would make it a crime. What those 25 member congregations did to pass out applications for ballot by mail, they would be criminals for doing it under House Bill 3080. It would prohibit them from doing that civic engagement activity. House Bill 3281 would shorten the ballot receipt deadline, so by 5 days. Right now, if that mail-in ballot arrives postmarked by Election Day and arrives the day after, it will count. Under this bill, your mail-in ballot would have to arrive at the very end of early voting, which is a Friday before Election Day on Tuesday. In addition to that, the overwhelming majority of ballots that are rejected, like 85% in a couple counties, are rejected because they already arrive late. The Postal Service just gets them there late. So this would absolutely increase the number of rejected ballots that were otherwise legal invalid votes. House Bill 3920 would make a confusing definition even more confusing. So the definition of disability was confusing for many people, to the point that the Texas Supreme Court had to weigh in on it over the summer. The Texas Supreme Court clarified it. They said that it's up to the voter to decide if he or she is disabled. What House Bill 3920 does is it further restricts the definition of disabled and uses very vague language to say if you're unable to leave your residence, then you do not qualify as disabled. And then finally, House Bill 4331, it would make a felony to distribute applications for ballots by mail if, and many congregations do this, if you have a position on a ballot measure, which is something that many nonprofits and even churches are allowed to do under the IRS code and routinely do. So it is an overly broad and overly vague definition of paid vote harvesting that would apply to your otherwise permissible civic engagement activity. That's just the voting rights stuff in calendars. Now we're moving on to all the things in calendars that are not voting rights. So real quickly, we already mentioned it, this House Bill 1399, Representative Krause. This is the bill that would prohibit doctors from performing gender transitioning or gender reassignment medical procedures. It is in House calendars. It's just hating on trans kids is really the only point of this legislation, and using children as a political wedge, frankly. And it is in House calendars and needs to stay there. On criminal justice reform and George Floyd related legislation, we have House Bill 831, which is a good bill that would place limits on the use of force when making an arrest. And then we have 2 other bills, House Bill 492 and House Bill 1272. Both would regulate the use of no-knock warrants. And this is what got Breonna Taylor killed, where the police had the wrong house. The police did not say they were the police. They just kicked down a door in the wee hours of the morning. And the boyfriend thought his home was being invaded. Did what any red-blooded American male would do and defended his home and his girlfriend, thinking that his home was being invaded, and the police shot and killed Breonna Taylor. We've got to reform, if not eliminate, no-knock warrants. We're now out of the House Calendars Committee for now.
Let me pause there real quick. We did get a question in the chat that asked if they made made the telephone calls last week, should we make them again this week? And I think on these, the on these calls to calendars, the list is a little bit different, right? So making the calls to calendars with an updated list is probably fair.
Yeah, it is. If you did it last week and have that action alert, just compare and contrast. We leave bills on there because we know not everybody's made calls. And if it's still there, we want to keep it there for new people. But I don't know what calls and conversations you've had or not had. But to the extent that it's new information, you should call.
So not everything's in calendars, right? We're also watching some other things.
That's right. Not everything. I mean, we're at the point where calendars is a gorilla in a room or an elephant in the room, but it's not the only thing in the room. So let's not ignore everything else because there's an elephant in the room. Electric market legislation. We have a couple bills that are not good, that need to stay in House State Affairs. So if you called about this last week, okay, maybe don't. Maybe find some friends to call for you this week, especially if they're in the districts of the members of State Affairs. But these are the two bills that would kind of arbitrarily, frankly, assign a cost to renewable generators for when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining, and charge the renewable generators for not generating, and use that money to subsidize the oil and gas industry, who are the folks that actually caused the winter blackouts by not being properly winterized. It's incredibly cynical and also incredibly real. And I mean that in the sense of the Senate bills are over in the House. The House bill has already had a hearing. So any day, the Senate State Affairs Committee could vote these bills out. So it's a pretty critical and urgent situation if you support renewable power to make a call on these bills right now. And then we have, moving on to two good healthcare bills we mentioned. There was House Bill 133. This is 12 months for women who were pregnant. We need to get this bill moving in the Senate Health and Human Service Committee. So calls to that committee are in order. House Bill 290 is 12 months of continuous eligibility for children. This bill needs to be referred. The Lieutenant Governor has not referred it for reasons unknown. Nevertheless, it's worth calling your Lieutenant Governor to encourage that this bill be referred quickly for a hearing so it can be heard. And then finally, we have two bills that don't really fit a category, but they speak for themselves. The unlicensed carry of firearms, House Bill 1927, appeared to not have the votes. It may still not have the votes, but it is still moving forward as if it has the votes. It has moved out of the special committee that was specially created just for this bill. It is on its way to the intent calendar. So the call is to your state senator to encourage your state senator to oppose this legislation. Basically, we'd be regulating how you drive a car far more intensely than how we regulate how people carry guns, which is a deadly weapon too. At least anyway, call your state senator on this bill. And then finally, Senate Bill 1089 by Senator Buckingham. This is a payday lending bill. It is a bad payday lending bill. It would allow the regulated payday lenders. There are the regulated and the barely regulated, but this is the ones that are regulated under 342. It would allow them to double the cost of a loan. It is a bad bill that the entire coalition that wants payday lending reform is actively opposing. And so call your state senator. It's on the Senate intent calendar and could come up any day. So the call is to your state senator to oppose 1089.
All right. So again, all of that is as of 1:02 p.m. on Monday, and maybe as of noon because we might have missed something in the last hour. I just got a text asking if there's any way to recap all of the bill updates. In fact, yes. The answer is yes. Very soon, everything that Josh just read from the action alert will be updated on the Texas Impact website. Go to texasimpact.org, click on the Action Center. We'll have a list of our last couple of action alerts on there, so keep an eye out for that this afternoon. And then we'll provide updates throughout the course of the week. And any number of ways. Make sure that you're signed up for the rapid response team. If so, you'll get an email with the updated action alert or specific calls to action for your district. Keep an eye on the e-news later this week as well. Legislative engagement groups, a program where you will be connected with other members in your legislative district, have a Slack channel that we'll be providing updates to. And finally, you can always check our Weekly Witness Facebook group for updates as well. But if you need ways, if you have questions, if you have about any of the processes or bills, you can always email me at scott@texasimpact.org, and I'll try to get you plugged into one of those different opportunities. Josh, anything to add before we close out?
No.
All right, y'all. Then Josh, thanks for the time. I'm sure I'll be looking at both the back of your head and text messages from you through the rest of the week, and we'll look forward to spreading the word about calls to action. Friends, thank you so much for the work you've been doing over the course of the last couple of weeks. And just a reminder, we have 4 more weeks, so it's time to go strong. Time to get some friends in your congregations involved. Remember that if you appreciate Texas Impact and the Weekly Witness community, make sure that you and your congregation are members. Our work is supported by members like you, so make sure that you go to texasimpact.org/join. Friends, this is a busy week, and spoiler alert, I'm going to say the same thing for the next 3 weeks. We have 4 weeks left. Let's finish this session strong. And this is a perfect time to invite some friends in your congregations to join you to make that closing push. So with that, let's get to work.